Hello, I'm Josh Baer, and welcome to the Baer Faxt Podcast. This episode is brought to you by BitGo, the leading infrastructure provider of digital asset solutions. They partnered with us on our upcoming Metaverse City Guide. Look out for that in the weeks to come. Ever since the start of the pandemic, the art world seemed to be on a 24/7, 12-month-a-year cycle of business. But now, before the upcoming fall auction season, it looks like some of us are finally taking a bit of a summer break. But at the Baer Faxt, we thought this would be a good time to reflect by revisiting some highlights from our past episodes. It's been a year and a half since we launched the Baer Faxt Podcast in March 2023. As a still relatively new program, we have been organically growing our audience. Can't tell you how many times in the past year I was stopped in different countries at art fairs, conferences, or auction by my art world friends and strangers, hearing them say, "I love the Baer Faxt Podcast." To me, an OG guy who started the Baer Faxt business 30 years ago by sending out a weekly newsletter on a simple fax machine, this is a whole new experience. I was a bit reluctant at the beginning, but now it's been rather rewarding, especially when I was told by our team that now we have listeners from all over the world, across 138 countries. So join us as we celebrate and look back on some of our team's favorite moments in the past year and a half of the Baer Faxt Podcast. When people ask what the Baer Faxt stands for, our answer is access and knowledge. As we prepared to launch this program, we were clear that it would be defined by exclusive, deep, and authentic conversations. Although it's not always easy to get people to talk openly and honestly, especially those who've been in the industry for a long time, I'm fortunate to have some friends from my OG days who share the same belief and fully trust us. Jeff Poe is one of those friends. So when he announced that he would be stepping back from his role as co-founder of Lemon Poe Gallery, after 30 years of helping put Los Angeles on the map as an art city, I immediately invited him to sit down with us.
So there's like this kind of shock, like, why would I leave? But why wouldn't I? I mean, it's like I don't need to do this anymore. And if I'm not getting enjoyment from it, it's just like, it's
that's
okay.
why I wrote before this, when is enough enough? When do you have enough money, enough fame, enough challenge, enough creativity that I think being a gallerist, you really have to commit yourself to, you're almost a fiduciary for the artist to them first. It's very challenging physically, emotionally, health-wise. It's like, why wouldn't you, take the win?
Yeah. To be constantly at service is difficult, yes. And that's basically what gallerists are. And they're serving the artist, they're serving the collector, they're serving their staff to make sure that everybody's together. I mean, it's a lot.
What about the competition for keeping and getting artists? That seems like a never-ending battle.
I find that more of a New York-centric thing, especially like what happened today or yesterday, I guess, with Beauvais leaving Zorner for Gagosian. And there's chatter about it, like, why would that happen? LA never really did that. We don't steal from other galleries. Now it's an international situation, and, that happens.
Even if you're Barbara Gladstone or Marion Goodman, you're fighting for new artists every day. That hamster wheel of that is how to still be relevant. Isn't that kind of one of the biggest challenges of a contemporary gallery?
We started this conversation talking about, kind of music and shit. And I was in punk bands, and the gallery's motto was play the game, change the rules. That's what we were going to do. We were going to do everything that was right, everything that we were supposed to do. But then we were going to show Murakami and somehow get in statements because we wrote something that nobody had ever seen before. And then get in there.
Statements meaning Art Basel.
Yeah. And, do this insane show, which, broke the bank, go for broke and see what happens. Just not do it in a certain way that was supposed to be done. We were going to do things a little bit differently, come from LA, not be assholes, not be intimidated. There was a lot of intimidation in those early years towards us. It was kind of like, what the fuck, totally stunning. But we never backed down. Now, what's interesting is that the rules are gone. The way things used to be, they are totally gone.
Give me a for instance.
It's just not the way it used to be. For instance, museums aren't as important any longer. Criticism is out the fucking door. Nobody gives a shit or reads. Artists have careers that last 5 months, 6 months. You got the Long Museum selling at auction. I mean, these are all things that used to be like, everybody be clutching their pearls and saying, oh dear. Now it's like, this is normal. This is what happens all the time. Artists would stay with their dealers for decades. Were there contracts then? No. Now there's contracts every day. People suing each other, then not that much now. Yes, I mean, look at Richard, look at Prince with Instagram and what's going on with that. Everything has kind of exploded. It's almost like it used to be kind of contained and then entropy kind of took hold and now it's all lukewarm. And all the old models are kind of thrown out the door.
Well, again, it comes back to money and greed. And for a while, I thought, well, if everybody's making more money, why don't they behave better? Because they have enough. And in fact, it seems to go the other way. It's like the more you have, the more you want, and the worse you can behave because it's about money. Isn't all the what you said about the rules come back to money?
Yeah, it does. And connoisseurship's out the door. I mean, that used to be a big part of it too. And it's like, it's just shot.
Jerry Saltz, a longtime friend since the 80s, and that's the 1980s, not the 1880s, was the first person I shared the idea of starting the Baer Faxt with in 1994. We both witnessed the golden days of the art market and art criticism. Today, one of us is an art critic, the other an art advisor. You can probably guess which one is which. We share a lot of history, though we still have some major differences. For instance, when we look at art, Jerry believes that great is the enemy of everything else, while I still hold that good is the enemy of great. You and I have such different views of the art world, which is, I think, what makes it interesting, that we don't have monolithic thoughts. I remember one time you said to me, and I don't remember the context, I said, I'm not interested in 50,000 sort of mid-level, mediocre, probably the word I used, artists. And you said, well, I am. Can you explain why?
Well, let's see. I'm not sure if that's the exact right quote, but a couple of things. I think that 85% of what you will see will be mediocre. But the interesting thing, Josh, is that your 85% and mine are one thing, 85%, 85%. Everybody has a different thing. So this 15% of overlap becomes an extremely interesting...
15% of excellence.
The 15% of what isn't mediocre,
yes.
Right? And our job is to kind of sort through it. The point I think I might have been trying to get to was that you and yours tend to focus on, a little less lately, but had focused on the top like 12 artists over and over, or the top 22. And I think that that's just a terrible disservice. Not that those 22 artists aren't any good. I'm sure they're okay. Some are really mediocre, in my opinion. But a lot of the rest are probably amazing and better.
Well, I guess where we come apart in some ways, and we're actually much closer in other ways than you realize, is out of the 4 million artists in America, there's a lot of noise there.
Right.
And then I think, well, there were 60,000 artists who lived during the Renaissance. I can probably name one, maybe two. You probably got 6 or 8. It's hard to imagine there are that many what I would call great artists. And me personally, I'm looking for great work. And I think you're coming at it from a different vantage point.
Yeah, again, I think the great is the enemy of everything else. I truly do. The great may be great, but then the maybe not so great is really great in another way, meaning what they're doing might be equally important somehow. Maybe we'll forget them. Maybe we won't even know who Lawrence Weiner is in 10, 15, 20 years. It doesn't matter. It's what is the conversation now?
Well, let me ask you, as an art advisor, which is my other hat, first of all, what you think of art advisors and their role, and then I'll come back to you with how that relates to what you just said.
I think that art advising is really important. Honestly, every single person in the art world has a job. My job's no more important than your job is no more important than anybody's job. And art advisors do a job. They try to tell people what to buy. All art advisors will claim that I'm trying to get my clients to buy their own thing. But the truth is, everybody is pretty much buying pretty much the same 22 artists. Fine with me. That's your job. Keep doing it. If you want to broaden it out to 50, maybe you've gotten 50 artists. That's fine. And keep doing it.
I mean, for me, 50 artists or 100 or whatever are sort of like around the world, the ones that have that sort of ability to have the longevity. It's a different standard when you're looking at artists under 30, that you can't use the same standard for history.
Well, again, I'm not talking about age. What I'm thinking about is I'm always interested when I go into artist homes, for example, what they collect. And they collect their friends, things they found on the street, things that were given to them, things that are great, and things that are really not great at all that become great.
They're doing things that relate, many of them, to how they think about their own work rather than thinking about it as either a collector or an accumulator of objects.
I would say that's true, but I'm also interested in any person that collects things, that's how they collect. The truth is, I think people should collect whatever the hell they want to collect. It's just the problem for me is 99% of the people collect the same, 1% of all the artists.
I think
and
there's more and
that's a
more
problem.
truth to that in terms of, and then they shift to the same 5 new ones.
Yeah.
And then they move to the same.
And that's fine. That's what people want to do. That's great.
But I will say, and I do say to my clients, when you're spending your own money, and a lot of money sometimes, good is the enemy of great.
Hey, didn't I just say that?
I think you said great is the enemy of good.
Oh, well, all I know is
We had different enemies on that. It's like things that are really good can get in the way of being too low a standard as an art advisor rather than as an art critic. We're on the same field, but we're in different sidelines.
This episode of the Baer Faxt Podcast is brought to you by BitGo. BitGo is the leading infrastructure provider of digital asset solutions, offering custody, wallets, staking, trading, financing, and more. BitGo is the preferred security and operational backbone for more than 1,500 institutional clients in 50 countries.
Art fairs play a crucial role in the art market. They not only bring together galleries, collectors, art institutions, and advisors, but also serve as important ambassadors, making art accessible to the general public worldwide. In the early stages of launching our podcast, we dedicated 2 episodes to conversations with directors and founders, spanning from the oldest art fairs to some of the youngest and most international ones. I first spoke to my friend Lauren Toshin, who consulted on the founding of Art Basel Miami Beach. It's become a little bit of January, it's Singapore, February, it's Freeze LA, March, it's this. How do we get around that? Or how would a fair get around just being that slot in the calendar?
Well, I think there's 2 parts. Part of it is the galleries, which, they feel they need to have a presence at the 3 fairs, whether it's Basel, Miami, and Hong Kong, and now Paris. And then maybe adding 1 or 2 fairs on top of that, it feels like. So they pretty much have stuck it to their program of what they want to do. I think for collectors, things have become a little bit more regional. And it's interesting as well of people going to galleries, going to a fair in Art Cologne and going to that fair and say, okay, this is a regional fair, but if I'm in Europe, I'll go, or a fair in Tefaf and going to those fairs. So in a way, more regional, I think is a little more interesting and less traveling and staying what's in your backyard a little bit instead of having that pilgrimage to have to go all the time and supporting some local artists.
In part 2 of our double episode, we turned away from large international art fairs to more local regional models. We went to the very beginning with Daniel Hug, the director of the world's oldest art fair, Art Cologne.
Basel draws collectors from all over the world. There was a time when Art Cologne was the worldwide leader in the contemporary art market amongst art fairs. That went from about 1967 until the mid-90s, and then it was replaced by Art Basel. Basel, from the beginning, was really forced to look at the international market because they didn't have enough local galleries, per se. Cologne, from the beginning, was a closed-off market in its first year, in the sense that only German galleries were invited to participate. But over time, it opened up to inviting galleries from abroad, particularly American galleries. But at the same time, it always had an obligation to support the local market, to support German galleries. We have this kind of global art collecting community, and then we have these, let's call them regional markets. The bulk of German galleries sell to German collectors. Can't really compare it to the US. I think most American galleries sell to Americans. And then you have this smaller percentage of really high net individuals active on a global level. You need both for a healthy art ecosystem. Art Cologne can be and is perceived as a regional market, but it's a huge regional market.
While reflecting on the past, we also look to the future of Asia with David Chow, co-founder of Art 021, an art fair that launched about 10 years ago in Shanghai and later expanded to Beijing. As we publish this episode, Art 021 is launching its first edition of a sister fair in Hong Kong.
Because the Chinese contemporary market is quite new for the last 10, 20 years. The whole Western art market has been there for a long time, over 100 years, the modern art market. That whole system cannot be translated and copied directly into the Chinese market. So that's why we are learning a lot from Art Basel, of course, from Frieze, from all these global, from Tefaf. But at the same time, we know what the Chinese market want and what the Chinese collectors need. So we've been twisting a lot and we've been adding a lot of what the Chinese market needs into our fair. So I think that kind of formed our identity compared to any of the other fairs.
What's your advice to people who are first-timer for Art Basel this year?
I probably wouldn't recommend anyone's first art fair to go to Art Basel. It's too overwhelming. You won't be able to buy anything. Everything good will already be bought. I'd probably recommend people to go to more of a smaller regional and smaller fairs. And then, when they're ready, go to Art Basel.
Those of you familiar with my work know that I've spent many years in auction rooms covering sales at major auction houses, sometimes as an advisor, helping to buy or sell works for my clients, and at the same time, identifying bidders and writing for the Baer Faxt newsletter. Over the years, I've also witnessed many auction professionals building up their remarkable careers even beyond the auction house. One notable figure is Louis Gausser, the former co-chairman of post-war contemporary art at Christie's, who is best known as the mastermind behind the $450 million sale of Da Vinci's Salvator Mundi in 2017.
What was the name of your taxi driver on the way into the auction that night for the Da Vinci? The Uber driver was named.
You have a good memory. It was on the day of the auction, and I could barely eat my breakfast. I could not eat anything, and we had to go in this day, and we knew that, as always, stars have to align. At the end of the day, there's not that much you can do. The stars, they align or they don't, but moving stars, it's not that easy. But then suddenly when I ordered my Uber, the Uber says, gonna be there in 3 minutes. Your driver is Leonardo. So when that happened, you have a good memory, but when that happened, I said that what are the chances that the Uber driver is called Leonardo? It's all going to be good. All the stars are starting to align from this moment. What happened is that I went down there and I realized that I forgot my tie, which I needed for the auction. So then I was terrified of losing him. So I said, sir, I forgot my tie, but please do not cancel me because I need to take this ride with you. I cannot not take this ride with you. He said, please don't cancel. I'm just going to go up and I'm get my time and I'll be back. I'm just begging you. And he said, sure. And I rushed up. I got back. And then when I was in the car, I said, okay, I can surrender. It's going to happen. And I guess the rest was history.
So to circle back, what is your view of that crazy thing called the art market or the art markets? What's going on from your vantage point?
Look, I think there's two things. We always want to approach the market as a monolithic beast, but it's not. Even when the market was strong or overheating, as people were saying, and everything was flying off the shelf, even during that time, there were artists experiencing huge recalibration in prices. The same when the market is a bit slower. When things are really good, people think they're great, but they're actually way more balanced. It's just that the spotlight is always on what is doing well. Right now, you have those sales that did extremely well, but also the auction houses are very smart. They will show and sell and highlight at this moment the works that will sell the best in this current market. It's never as good. It's never as bad as we think. It's probably actually healthier than we think because it's constantly away from the spotlight and away from the ArtNet news, the Bloomberg news, the high numbers we see. There's a constant turnover and cleaning and healthiness of the market up and down. And then the second thing, everybody's talking about interest rates and the macro situation and I'm worried about the art market, but I also see, the field of collecting is expanding and that's constant. Even when people have less money, there's still people interested in art. And I always see the art market as an underground mushroom that just spreads on the ground and keeps spreading. There's no macro situation that changes the growing interest generally in art. So yes, you have different forms of pressure on the market here and there, but on the other hand, to counter that, you have a growing collecting base. So that, I think, accounts for what we call a bit of a softer landing or maybe more resilience in the art market. And then there's another more, I would say, metaphysical, and you're going to think I'm crazy, but interpretation that I have. I think that especially in the world we're living in, with the absolute chaos that is going on, the entropy, the anxiety, and so forth, there is something that is people don't really know how to deal with this situation. I see there's about 4 ways to deal with it. One is to get drunk and get numb to the situation. One is probably to take some other drugs to dissociate yourself from it. The other one is probably to meditate and to try to transcend, more find a spirituality or so forth. And probably the fourth is to buy. The interest rate can keep going up, but people find some kind of security in buying art. And you can call it retail therapy. And I think that in itself divides in 2 components. There's one, I would say, probably unhealthy. That is basically you have some kind of existential or spiritual void and you want to fill it with objects. You want to cling to something solid because everything around you is breaking apart. But the other one is actually a way to connect with something that goes beyond, and that is an entry point in some kind of metaphysical realm that transcends chaos, basically.
In this episode, Loic also shared with the audience his personal story of standing in front of his former boss's fax machine as a young man, eagerly waiting for the Baer Faxt newsletter to arrive, like it was a Christmas present. It's heartening to see how a young reader of the Baer Faxt has grown and evolved over the years. Another person I've frequently seen in auction rooms is UC Pilkanen, the former global president of Christie's and a star auctioneer who has sold some of the world's most expensive artworks. When UC was announcing he was leaving Christie's after nearly 40 years, We invited him for his first sit-down interview since stepping down as global president to start his own independent advisory firm. Art Bilkanen.
Many people don't know you as well as an expert and specialist in that, and they know you as the face of Christie's from the rostrum as the number one auctioneer. Could you talk a little bit about, as an auctioneer, how you would feel on the stage and whether you believe and why a better auctioneer can do a better job and get a bigger price, if that's your role, and how you did that?
I think the two roles that you described are implicitly linked. I think being a great expert, which I ran the Impressionist department after all for over a decade at Christie's, is part of the secret. If you know how good the artwork is, you know when to pause. If you know who's bidding, because they're people that have collected with you for many years, you also know when to pause. You also know how to keep the pace of an auction going, which is incredibly important. I mean, if something fails, you move on, and you move on with the same pace as you would as if it had sold for a world record price. So sort of pace, poise, and professional knowledge of the market is absolutely quintessential in my view.
So when something buys in, you just like, it's out of your brain, you're able to disengage from, I know that consignor, it's a great, all that, you just like turn the page?
100%. I think that's probably the Finnish blood in me, sisu, or just, how would I put it? The ability to move on and do the right thing at the next step. Interestingly, not a lot of people recognize this, but the very next lot after Leonardo da Vinci that made $450 million was a Basquiat at $25 million, which was guaranteed by the house and failed to sell.
Most of us, when consigning, say we don't want to be the one after the biggest lot, that all of a sudden people are running around and their hair's on fire.
I think that...
Would that painting have sold if it was before the Da Vinci?
No, it was all about the picture. So for me, putting 5 masterpieces back to back is fine, as long as the auctioneer is able to judge the pace, settle the room and pause. So with the Leonardo, even during the bidding, I paused for 60 seconds when we hit 220 million, because the bidders need time. And that's something very interesting I've noticed about most auctioneers, is that when they've got a lot of competition, there were still 3 people in the bidding for that, they rush. When there's a lot of competition, slow down, pause, give people time, because actually what they're indicating is their appetite to acquire. And if somebody's got the appetite to acquire, it far transcends their appetite to drop out. If you're in a hurry, it gives them the excuse that you're hurrying, you're rushing them. If you go slowly, you're much more likely to, A, get the top price, but B, have everybody feeling they were given the same opportunity to buy the object. Because once a collector has decided that they're in the sale room, or even privately, wanting to acquire an object, you have to give people the right, appropriate amount of time.
Well, those people are
different.
Not used to not getting what they want.
100%.
So if you can get them to raise their hand and say, I want it, they're sometimes emotionally going to go crazy. If you never got them to they want it, then they can be disciplined. You know, if you're a multi-billionaire and you're looking at $1 million object and you want it, it's kind of money isn't the object at that point, right?
Yeah, and you know, in your lifetime, you get the one opportunity to buy the object of your desire. So Lawrence Graff, when he bid for the Liechtenstein in the front row in New York, probably 10 years ago now, I had no idea specifically that he wanted to buy that object. But once he started to bid, I could tell from his body language that he was in it. And when he dropped out, I know Lawrence very well. I leant forward to him and I said, Lawrence, are you sure? And paused. I paused for quite a long time. He came back in and, having said no, very audibly to the whole room. And he bought the picture at, I think, $10 million more. And to this day, he thanks me for giving him that time.
How good are you as of an auctioneer if you show up to do 9th century silver? Is there even 9th century silver? There must be. But when you're doing a sale that you had no involvement with and no actual knowledge and you don't know the clients, were you good at that?
I'm always more comfortable when I know the client base. But if I know the quality of the art and the specialists were clear enough with me about what was going to travel and what was going to be sold at the reserve or near it, and also gave me a complete description of the room, The Robert Ellsworth sale, for example, I flew over from London to take that. They were very keen for me to take it. We broke every single record in the book in a packed sale room. But I was given hugely...
The first Banksy-like moment of a sale, as I sort of recall?
It was a Banksy-like moment because the very last lot of the sale was a Buddha, where the arm of the Buddha actually dropped off, literally as I was going to offer it. It was center stage, and the arm of the Buddha, for whatever reason, hadn't been properly attached. It was just on a little peg. And as I started to open the bidding, the arm fell off. And of course, everybody in the room gasped as they watched the arm drop onto the stage below them. I just turned to the Buddha and said, "Are you bidding?" Which completely broke the atmosphere and actually made people feel spiritually that maybe Robert Ellsworth was in the room. Something was there, present amongst us. Last lot of the sale. Historic sale where every object had broken a world record. And interestingly, the specialists were nervous about how this ancient artifact would sell, but knew that it had been very important to Ellsworth. And it went on to make a world record. It's a huge applause. And afterwards, many of the collectors that had come from China were completely with me in saying, yeah, we felt it. Robert was in the room because he'd been very close to so many of those people over so many years and being a great supporter of that marketplace. So they were very, very pleased about that, and extraordinary moment.
Speaking of auctions, one of our first guests was Howard Rashofsky, a Dallas-based collector with plenty of great stories about his biggest nights at auctions.
I guess my most noteworthy sale was a transaction in, this really dates me, but I think it was 2008 when I sold Jeff Koons balloon flower that we had bought in the late 90s. And the rationale for selling it, quite frankly, was that I had the opportunity to acquire another work that was extraordinarily costly, and I have and had at the time finite resources, and I felt like buying the work that I bought would be more additive to the collection, and I actually bought 3 works with the proceeds from the sale of the balloon flower. And that was actually the only time, to my recollection, that I ever had a guarantee on a work of art for sale. I was well advised, working with Alan Schwartzman, and at the time with Amy Capolazzo, who was at Christie's at the time, in shepherding the sale of that work in London. And the timing was extraordinary, and they were able to present it outside in a little park in London, which was sort of unheard of. It's the only time I ever sat in one of those little private boxes at the auction. The auction was kind of a big letdown because there was a guarantee in place, and I think the work sold actually, a little better than the guarantee. So I think no one lost any money on the transaction, and I was more than pleased, but that was at a price level at which I don't traffic with any regularity, but that was a one-off in terms of a guarantee. I didn't really play the auction houses off against each other. This was really an idea that was precipitated by our desire to acquire something else.
What were the other 3 things, if you can tell us, that you acquired? And a follow-up or corollary to that is, back in those days, you could use the 1031 like-kind exchange.
Correct.
And would you be less inclined to do that whole thing now because that tax break no longer exists?
Well, I probably would have done it anyway because I felt at the end of the day, you pay your taxes and you find a way to acquire the work if you think what you're buying is ultimately more useful to the collection, and ultimately we would think to the museum. But we bought 3 works from that. The major work that we bought was a suite of paintings by Sigmar Polka that was made available to us because of a long-standing relationship with the gallery and with the artist particularly. And this is a body of work that really was from his personal collection. It wasn't a work for sale through a gallery in a conventional exhibition, but it was a work that was distinguished and one that we coveted particularly and felt like would really be significantly additive to the collection. And the second and third work were 2 works of Italian artists, one Lucio Fontana and the other Piero Manzoni. We were really rounding out our collection of post-war Italian work where we were relatively deep, and these were works that had historical significance and were incredibly additive to the collection. And in fact, they're both on exhibit at the warehouse right now in the current exhibition that we have up.
Well, one of the things I would encourage our audience to do at some point is to go to the warehouse in Dallas. And it's probably the preeminent American collection of post-war Italian art that's been built over a long period of time.
This episode of the Baer Faxt Podcast is brought to you by BitGo, the first digital asset company to focus exclusively on serving institutional clients. Founded in 2013, BitGo is the largest independent digital asset custodian in the world, securing approximately 20% of all on-chain Bitcoin transactions by value.
While engaging in insightful conversations with auction houses, art fairs, galleries, foundations, art institutions, and collectors, we've always recognized how important it is to invite artists as guests. After all, it wouldn't be called the art world without the art created by artists, right? And we knew just the perfect guest who would be artist Alicia Quada, who does not shy away from discussing any topic. When our president Lu Yang sat down with Alicia in her Berlin studio earlier this year, she got straight to the point and asked her views on the relationships between artists and the art market. Alicia was very candid in sharing her thoughts on so-called sensitive topics, including gallery representation, the pricing of artists' work on the secondary market and at auction houses, and she also offered sincere advice to emerging young artists.
I have a bit mixed feelings about that because I think it's not that most people are too shy about it. It's kind of hard to emotionally understand the art market as an artist because it's so different to what you do as a need, and I mean like the biggest desire, but like a need, like a addiction. So it's kind of hard to really emotionally understand this kind of market. I can intellectually understand it, but I cannot emotionally understand it. So that's why it's also hard for me to understand auctions, for example. I'm not getting the point. Why pieces on auctions are so much more expensive sometimes. From a living artist, you could just go next door to a gallery and buy it for half price. I'm not getting the point, really. I mean, I can get it. Of course, I can get it from the dynamics a bit of the art market. But still, it feels not like I think it's such a different kind of way of thinking and feeling. So it's kind of difficult for most artists to adapt on that, really honestly. That's why they better step away. But there's also many cliches, saying, okay, we have nothing to do with the art market, we leave it to the other. But I don't think so at all, on the other hand. That's why, and there's, for example, I mean, I'm going to art fairs quite a lot, and I like to see it. I kind of like to see what's going on. It's for me, it's like, I can like just in a couple of hours, I know what all of my colleagues are doing right now, what the prices are, who's showing whom, who's supporting whom. I'm always like reading like at each Unlimited or something, and I'm like, okay, which gallery is doing this or Biennales? It's interesting for me. So I'm very well informed after I left an art fair, for example. But then, of course, there's this saying, and I hear it every time people see me on an art market. It's like this Baldassare saying, like an artist on an art fair is like watching your parents having sex. Well, but that is like 30 years ago as well. We're like these roles of being a gallerist or as a salesperson and curator and an artist have been very clear. So everybody had his rule back then. That's my feeling. I mean, I've been not reading the art market in the 80s, but that's what I kind of imagine. And it's still I kind of get to know, when I kind of started in the artwork. So I think it was a very clear, setup. Who's doing what, and the artist was the artist, like it was, fun to have them drunk and crazy. There was like the intellectual curator, and there was the mean shark, the business person. But no, it gets, the world is changing and it gets much softer, those kind of borders, due to the access to different medias, due to many, many things. There is a couple of artists, and I'm including myself to this group actually, who are very aware of what they do and about their prices, about, which pieces are going where and to whom, and, about the inventories and all of that. I'm controlling that pretty much, and I'm very aware of what I do, I guess. I mean, I believe at least. So I think, those borders are getting softer. Even, the term to be represented by a gallery seems like a bit kind of odd because it's like, What means represent? Represented is like, having an artist on your silver tray and showing it to the world. I don't know, but in most cases, that is also another story right now. I think it's more shifting towards like a cooperation than, being someone's artist. But this is what my feeling on the one hand. But as I said in the beginning, on the other hand, still this dynamics of the art market, really, of all these auctions and sales and stuff like that. This is so different to my own, spot of interest and my own kind of priorities and my own sources that it still is very abstract to me. And I also don't feel super sure about it. So for me, it's super hard to judge, for example, if my pieces are on auctions. I have no idea if it should if it's good, if it's sold very high, or if it's not good, if it's, just for the average, or it's good, if it falls through sometimes. It's kind of hard for me to follow this logic.
And I personally don't believe that people say artist has to be starving artist in order to make good art. And that's why I wanted to ask a question, because you are considered as more established artists. I wonder, especially for younger artists, how should they, define their role with the interaction with the art world?
I think the only thing to do as a young artist is being visible. You have just to use any chance you're getting to make yourself visible. And this is kind of, multiplying your chances, because you just need one person to support you. You don't need the whole world to love you. In the beginning, you need one curator who kind of, seen it, discovered it, and is putting in your show. Or one gallerist who believes in the pieces and he's starting to work with you. Or one collector who is kind of, fascinated. But, there should be not too much pressure. It's not that you need like a complete system. You need 1, 2, 3 people, and then it goes further. But to reach out to those people, of course, you need to be visible. And I still believe that it's better to be physically visible somehow. I mean, of course, you can do Instagram and all of that, but there's so much things going on. So it's a little bit hard to fill out, I think. But I think, any group shows, whatever, and people are still looking at that things. They're passing by, they see it hanging somewhere in somebody's whatever, flat, give it away, just do it. Get it out for free. And nobody's paying in the beginning, of course, but it takes a while. But then because it's interesting what you said, about the suffering artist and the role of the artist. And of course, we all know that. It's an empty cliche, Most of artists we still know from art history have not been suffering artists. There's a few exceptions, but just a few. Most of them being established and making a possibly quite good life out of that.
Often, some of the most compelling stories from interviews emerge during casual conversation after the official interview has ended. This happened when I finished my conversation with Sandy Rauer, president of the Calder Foundation. My colleague Lu Yang, who joined us on Zoom, shared a personal story with Sandy. Their conversation became one of my favorite parts of this episode. Let's take a listen.
I was an undergrad student at the business school at UC Berkeley. Along Bancroft Way on the east side of the campus, there was a huge black sculpture that I passed by every day on my way to class. At that time, I didn't study art and knew nothing about this piece. But over time, I started feeling this strange connection to it, like it was trying to tell me something. So I started researching the artwork and the artist behind it. And that's how I discovered Calder and learned the name of the sculpture, the Hawk for Peace. Fast forward 20 plus years, I've seen Calder's works all over the world, but still, the Hawk for Peace holds a special place in my heart, not only as a witness to a key moment in my personal journey, but also as one of my first encounters with that world of art.
It's really fascinating because you were trying to find meaning in the object, as opposed to recognizing you were having an experience with the sculpture. You were by it every day. You said you walked by it. And that kind of intimate experience of it being part of your life on a daily basis is exactly what Calder was about. That's exactly what he was trying to achieve, especially in his public sculpture. But he also, he anticipated that every sculpture is going to be in people's homes. It wasn't like now that it's only in wealthy people's homes. It was, supposed to be in lots of people's homes. And that sculpture was originally called Boeing, not after the airplanes. It was like this idea of having buoyancy. And of course, it's at the time of the Vietnam War. It's very much like now. right? We have this extraordinary moment we're in, and a totally extraordinary moment. And Calder was adamantly against the Vietnam War, and he donated that sculpture to Berkeley because his sister was there, and like was on the board of the museum and stuff. She lived in Berkeley, and he donated it in honor of her husband and called it the Hawk for Peace because it looks, to some people, it looks sort of like a bird, like a hawk. Of course, it's not an abstraction of a hawk. Calder's not an abstract artist. He didn't take known images and convert them into abstract forms. He just created forms out of his own intuitive process. So the Hawk for Peace, he was saying, you know, maybe this is a moment on the campus of Berkeley to have some reference for a positivity of humanity, but not a propaganda, right? He said, my work has no propaganda value. So it wasn't trying to have some sort of statement, anti-government statement or anything. It was just more of like a hopeful human gesture. I love that you had that experience of being around that sculpture.
I'm so glad to share my personal story about Calder with you. I'm also curious, though, how would you like people to think about your grandfather as an artist and his works?
The weird thing about Calder is he's a difficult artist. Everybody thinks they understand Calder because it's so apparently immediately accessible, when actually it's not. So those other things, color, form, movement, right? The choreography of it draw you in and you think you're having this gratifying experience. But you really have to sit with his work. The whole Philadelphia project is about making the possibility to like sit on a bench and be with a work for an hour or longer for whatever time scale you want. And it's about opening yourself up, being present to it. What we really don't want to have is somebody tell you what the meaning is. Calder said his work doesn't have any meaning, which makes it very difficult. Then you have to bring meaning yourself. And to feel, you know, to be self-possessed enough to be able to come to art and say, I'm now going to engage with what is the meaning of this experience, right? Not the metal, but what the experience is, the body and the work together in a space, what that experience is something that gives a chance for an opening, a chance for kind of evolution.
Beeple was the first guest when we introduced the Baer Faxt Podcast. Many looked at Beeple's record-breaking sale of Everydays, the first 5,000 days, for only $69 million at Christie's as the moment that NFTs broke. While the market hype has since faded into the rear view, I still felt that it was the Wild West. When you combine creative people, new tech, and a financial incentive, something interesting is bound to happen. To learn more, we sat down with Beeple, otherwise known as Mike Winkelmann, for a wide-ranging conversation on the pros and cons of digital art and technology, as well as the ways highly motivated creative people are building new communities around it.
Honestly, I think a lot of artists are very hesitant to talk about the like money aspect or market aspect of it, but to me, it doesn't bother me. It's like interesting, but I think it's cool to be able to see it from both sides.
Well, we'll come to the money aspect of it, but it's like there's this sense of community that you've built for 20 years around your work as a digital artist. And we tend to put things in these sort of silos. And you were in that silo, what you call the art world with capital A, that's another silo. And there's pop culture silo. What is your community? How do you relate to community?
Yeah, I think the digital art community is something that I've definitely been a part of probably the last 10 years, just because prior to social media, it was much more kind of disjointed. But yeah, it's something that I think is really important and something that I think people don't maybe understand as much about my story is that is sort of what put me in the position to have this thing happen. The mix of the community that I had built up and the following that I built up over the last 20 years, and then this new technology that was the like fuse that lit the powder keg here.
Does that community want to go along for the ride that you're taking them into these other communities, or do they want to stay in their dorkiness kind of domus? I think you use that word.
No, almost everybody from the digital art community came along for the NFT ride, quite a lot of them. And that's what I saw is when I first learned of NFTs, it was like, wait a second. All this shit that nobody was paying any money for before, now they're paying money. All of the digital artists are going to come to this. Like, they're all like coming. So I knew there was about to be like a huge influx of people coming to this from my old world.
it made me think in the beginning, in March, first time I'm hearing the word NFTs, and you read about all this disruption. I'm thinking they want to disrupt, but they're desperate to do what you did, which was sell directly at Christie's, which is actually the least disruptive kind of thing. So which is it? Is it disruption? I'm not saying so much for you. You've made your choice and been clear, or is it non-disruptive?
I don't think it's as disruptive as people think. I think you're going to see this just be another way that people make a living, because it takes a certain type of artist. And I think there's certain artists who don't really want to market themselves. They don't really give a shit about social media. They don't want to fuck with any of that. They want to just paint stuff, and like that's what they enjoy doing. They need a gallery. They need somebody to have that infrastructure around them.
Because their job is to make the art. Not everybody has to have the Damien Hirst or the Beeple playbook.
Honestly, to me, it doesn't bother me. And I see the marketing that I do in terms of social media as an extension of the art. Looking at the teaser videos as their own little art pieces, to me, is really fun and just another extension of the whole project. But yeah, a lot of people, they don't find that part of it to be artistic, and so they just don't give a shit about it. So that's where I think these things are not going to go away. A lot of the things that this technology provides, it's again just another canvas that I think is not so different than any other sort of new art form that wasn't art and then kind of became art.
Don't transact without the Baer Faxt. Subscribe to the Baer Faxt newsletter to receive key developments in the art world and op-eds from Josh Baer in your inbox each Thursday, plus special auction editions direct from the sale room. The only news source to find out who bought what and who tried to but didn't get it. Head to thebearfaxt.com to learn more and check out our full range of content offerings.
My colleague Lu Yang wears many hats at the Baer Faxt. With a background in the financial industry, she frequently asks insightful questions about the art market. As our executive producer, she constantly introduces new ideas and challenges us to reach new heights. One day, Lu Yang proposed an idea where she would sit down with me to discuss my thoughts on the market. That's how Bear With Me, a mini-series of the Baer Faxt Podcast, was born. Interestingly, Lu Yang had her own business talk show on national TV long before she ventured into the art world. Together, we travel around the art world's calendar in various countries, using these trips to document and discuss the current state of the art market. The following conversation took place last October when Lu Yang asked me my thoughts on an art market correction, a topic I wrote about in a previous newsletter.
I went back to our newsletters and I did reread some of things you wrote, especially the last one before our Christmas break. I'm just reading that right now. Quoting Josh, "Everyone has to acknowledge an art market correction, but let us be the first to predict an upcoming bull market." So, Josh, you called this in a bull market in 2024.
I predicted an upcoming bull market, but I didn't say 2024. I just said there's one coming.
That's a good point. You did say it won't be next week, and it will be more in terms of volume rather than price. Right? So should we start from a couple points that you made?
Well, let's start that it will be coming, and it may not be this year, but it will be coming. Markets go through bear periods and bull periods. And the sense is, for most people, that whatever period we're in, it's as if they will last forever. So when you're in a bear market, it feels like, oh my God, things will never get better. And when it's in a bull market, it's like, oh my God, it's only up, 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 spend more. And it cycles. And right at the moment when we're in this apparent correction phase, that most people are, especially in the media, are thinking that's it, it's changed forever, and this is what it is. My point is, it's coming. I can feel it coming. I can't put a date on it. I know it's not tomorrow. And in fact, it's probably not this year even.
That's a very important reminder, because that kind of represents, in a way, when people, and in the art world, people predict things based on one auction or one season or one art fair. Now, the 6 points or the 6 reasons that you mentioned, some of them make sense right away, and some of them I had a big question mark. First, you mentioned about wealth transfer to younger people will cycle art as a part of a trillion. Do you want to talk a little bit more on this first point?
Well, it's a general point that everybody's making in terms of the economy is the trillions of dollars that are going to be inherited by people in their 20s to 60s. And certainly a lot of great art collections were created by people who are now getting older in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. That art is going to be inherited and or sold. So that's a big, obvious thing that's happening. And I don't think anybody can debate that wealth transfer is going to happen. There's tax issues about what that means and how much of that will be liquid and how much of that will be then spent on art or by people having to sell art.
And you also mentioned there are going to be more and more players are coming into the market all over the world. I remember our previous conversations, and especially in the last year, we talk about the new collectors and newcomers and in the different regions. What do you think this year might be a little bit different or something more like a continuation compared to the last few years in terms of the new player trend?
Well, a couple points come to mind. Generally, new players have come from segments or regions all at the same time. So mainland China, wow, that opened up. Or the Mideast started collect art. Or people in tech got rich. There was generally a single group at a time that happened continuously. And now I would just say there's a global expansion of millionaires, centimillionaires, and billionaires being created. And it's not localized quite as much. The stat I read the other day, I don't even know if it's close to true, is they pegged 6,000 people as collecting art over $100,000 a year. That's not very many people. When you consider how many billionaires there are in the world, or how many people making over $10 million a year, that's still a big pool of people who are eligible, and I would argue are going to buy art. And there's still a huge amount of untapped money that could and should come to collecting art, or at least buying art, if not collecting art.
In March of 2024, I visited Art Basel, Hong Kong for the second time, a year after Liu Yang and I launched the Baer Faxt Podcast. This time, we were joined by two members of our team based in Asia. At the end of the trip, Liu Yang invited all of us to sit down and share our observation about Hong Kong's evolving dynamics and Asia's role in the global art market.
What kind of troubles me is like when people, we read on the press and people talking about like, okay, Hong Kong is less international now. There are not many Westerners coming. Sorry, Josh, you mentioned that too. But my question is like, when you talk about being international, are we too narrow-minded? Talking about just New Yorker collector coming here? What international means? What does it being international, matters to the people who are based in the region when this big event happen? Second one is about Hong Kong's position. I have so many friends living in Hong Kong. Not all of them are from Hong Kong originally, but what all of them are telling me, first of all, they're all buying art. They all bought something this week. They keep telling me, saying, we wanted Hong Kong to keep going, and we don't like what people are telling us Hong Kong is over. It's not over. We love Hong Kong. I mean, for somebody like me, live here for 6-7 years, Hong Kong still has a special position in my heart. So that's why it really bothers me when I hear this like, okay, XYZ is going to replace Hong Kong in terms of the arts. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a very big and sentimental question for me. I will say that I love Hong Kong as much as I do, but I do see the reasons are very sound and fair for many international institutions, bankings, corporates live in Hong Kong and relocate to other cities in Asia, including Tokyo, Singapore, or even New Delhi in India. As for the question, is XYZ going to replace Hong Kong? The question is no. But in the same time, as for the question, what's the future of Hong Kong? Is the tomorrow going to be better? The question can still be, I don't know. The future of Hong Kong is in blur. In the same time, no other city can replace Hong Kong.
I think that when most Western galleries talking about the potential replacement of Hong Kong, they are actually considering choosing the best trading place in Asia, which for them should be both convenient and spectacular. I remember about 10 years ago, a number of Western mega galleries opened their spaces in Hong Kong and in Shanghai, but later on, other galleries started to speculating whether Seoul would be a better place. Actually, this year, several Chinese galleries told me that the market feels much slower, but compared to the intense buying atmosphere before the pandemic, they now feel that it is more rational and healthier. But it also concerns me a bit because when the market here is no longer seen as a crazy, bustling spectacle, whether it will still attract the same level of attention in the future from the international art world, that is a question.
If we are saying international as in Hong Kong's role and functionality in bridging the Eastern and Western world, or as a trading harbor, then I can see as a bridge, it's not going to work as well as in the past. But it's not because of Hong Kong is not doing a great work as bridging the two worlds. It's because the external and the bigger questions. So the two worlds are dividing and are in disparity. It's not up to Hong Kong to decide whether it's being international or not.
Bridges have two sides.
Yeah.
Hopefully, bridge can connect and narrow gaps between the two sides.
When we talk about bridging the gaps between the two sides, we also emphasize the role that art institutions play in this regard. In the episode where I traveled to Washington, D.C., and sat down with Melissa Chu, director of the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, we exchanged opinions on creating an in-between space that encourages us to rethink modern and contemporary art history through multiple narratives, multiple voices, and multiple locations.
So the late 19th century, early 20th century works actually feel like they're so far removed from our life today that we feel like we have to always be providing much more context. So that's kind of one thing that our mission and scope kind of stretched, right, 50 years on from our founding. And then the other thing is that the art history itself, and I've spoken about this in the past, has changed so much from even when I went to art school. When I was at art school, I was very interested in multiple art centers. When I think of art history, I think of multiple stories, multiple voices, and multiple locations. And I don't think that that's how I was taught art history. I was taught art history as maybe two major art centers, and kind of that was it. You had to be in Paris or New York in order to really make it. When I was coming of age in the late 90s, there began to be a discussion about multiple art centers. And that's kind of what drew me into, in some ways, wanting to study what I did. It was a moment of international biennales and things like that. So when I think today of how we tell art history, in some ways I go back to my early studies, which is there are multiple ways of approaching this, multiple voices. And that's what we've tried to do in our Revolution's 50th anniversary show, which is to also allow contemporary counterpoints to the historical works in our collection.
Well, I'm going to come back a little bit more to politics. Revolution is an interesting concept. I'm thinking to what you were saying about even using the term post-war. It's been identified to me lately. It's like, whose war?
Yeah.
Which war? Which war? And we took it for granted, and you still see it at the auction houses talk about it, and we think about it as only one war. And suddenly language is going to have to change quite a bit. So as we slide into these terminologies, and I think reflecting on it is useful for where we stand, particularly as you're trying to think about how you're more global.
I'm always reminded of my work in Asia. And when I traveled to Vietnam in the mid-1990s, here we refer to it as the Vietnam War, and there they refer to it as the American War. And so it's all about where you are standing. And for so long, art centers such as New York were really a center. And so they defined the terms and the language.
There was one history of art. It was how MoMA told it from the beginning of Picasso, Brancusi, blah, blah, through Abax to pop art. And that's kind of an elite view. I happen to like that view, but it is a bit monolithic. Do you think, let's go back to Asia for a second. Now it's 2024. You have like M+ there. You have 25 years of being a bit open to the West. What do you see now versus when you started looking at art there and seeing the art scene?
I often think that it would be hard to imagine how much it's changed from when I first began to travel in the region, like from the early 1990s. And I think it's almost come full circle in the sense that throughout the 1990s, kind of peaking in anywhere from 2000 to 2010, there was an exponential sense of just development on every front, whether it was new museums, public and private, galleries, auctions, biennales, non-profits, artist-run spaces, all of the ecology that we come to associate with a contemporary art world was there in Asia in different ways in different countries. And yet today, we have a very different scenario. I was just talking to a friend and colleague, Orville Schell, who runs the US-China Center, and we collaborated on an interview about Chinese contemporary art because both of us were doing so much work at the time in the Chinese contemporary art scene. And we said we didn't realize that we were there at a high point, at a moment in which there was so much openness and kind of porosity between the art worlds, between the US, between China, between the world. And so now it's a very different environment. We always assume that it's linear progression, but actually it's never like that in reality, that things go back and forth all the time.
What I found fascinating being there 3 times last year and having been other times is it's kind of, the knowledge is kind of simultaneous for a lot of the people. They discovered old masters and Impressionism and pop art and emerging art almost simultaneous. They're seeing it in Broadway. In fact, I think they're a little bit embarrassed. Is that bad? I think it's kind of great to experience all art at one point rather than in this sort of classic way that we've been put together. Do you think that that's accurate to what's gone on for a lot of people?
I often think about it as an interesting asymmetry of knowledge in that whenever I travel in Asia, there's often a deep understanding of American art, actually. And yet here, there's not nearly an interest necessarily always in understanding what that local context is. I'm often struck by that. I think if we're talking about new collectors in Asia, that's a different scenario. And I think what is interesting is that what you speak of as a kind of a lack of hierarchy of knowledge necessarily, that you're learning things all at the same time. It's certainly the case that knowledge is learned very differently today than, say, even 15 years ago, because so much is available. I remember even a number of years ago that friends of mine in China would have a better sense. When I lived in New York, they'd have a better sense of what was going on in New York because people would FaceTime them at the openings and they would be doing videos. And so they would know all of, what was going on in Chelsea at that moment in time. And so I think that the way people consume or learn is very different today. But I would say that the idea of connoisseurship, which in the contemporary art world is like a bit of a dirty word, but it's how do you acquire a depth of knowledge? I think that's harder today, actually.
I often say we're over-informed but undereducated. And you think because you've got Google and all these things that you know what's going on. But if you're not seeing art in person, or there's just many rabbit holes. The other thing we noticed lately is there was a big show opening at Hauser & Wirth in Hong Kong. And I noticed like, this is a Chinese master. And like, none of us in the West know what that person is. So we in the West, in fact, we're behind. Because they know what's going on here, and we don't have much knowledge of what's been going on of 50 years of that. Do you feel that you bridge that gap a little bit, and that's part of your mission? To sort of...
I don't know about me personally, but my own background, my father is from China, my mother's Australian, and I think I have felt that I'm kind of acutely aware of an in-between space. And I'm not sure of how that's necessarily impacted my work here at the Hirshhorn, but I am very interested in artists that lie a little bit outside of the usual streams.
While you are listening to this episode, we'll be heading to Asia for events in Seoul, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Shanghai. We hope to answer some burning questions from the art world. Where is Asia now? And where will the region be in the near future? Our itinerary includes public and private talks, media conferences, and even an artist activation. After the next few months, we hope to offer a clearer picture of what we've learned. So don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media, or join our collector circle to receive full, up-to-date reports from us.
We'd like to give a big thank you to all our guests of the Baer Faxt Podcast. This episode is brought to you by BitGo. Our host is Josh Baer. Our executive producer is Luyang Zhang. Our content strategist is Boliang Shen. And I'm Patrick Hill, associate editor. Our audio editor for this episode is Auntie Lane. Check back soon for future episodes as we unpack the inner workings of the global art industry through exclusive, candid interviews with key players in the business, as they offer their perspectives on art and the market in the US, Asia, Europe, and beyond.